Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Eisenhower Health and our Best of Orthopedic lecture series. We'll get started momentarily with Dr. Rife, but a couple of housekeeping items. This is being recorded, so we are working to have this edited in the next couple of weeks once it's recorded, and then we will put it on our website, put it on the YouTube channel, Eisenhower Health, and then we'll also email it out to everyone who registered for the lecture. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass you over to Dr. Adam Rife, our board-certified podiatrist. He'll tell you more about his background, where he's been, and I'm just excited. He's also my doctor in Candid, so I love him, and I think you're going to as well. So with that, Dr. Rife, it's all yours, sir.
All right. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for tuning in. I've always been particularly interested in shoes. It started when I was a high schooler, learning how to pole vault. And I noticed for myself that it made a huge difference in my performance, in my comfort. And then later on, I was coaching when I was going to college, coaching high school pole vault again. And I noticed the kids with cheap shoes always had problems. And when we were able to talk the parents into buying a little better shoe, they generally were able to practice much longer and perform much better. Originally, I'm from Spokane, Washington. I went to college at BYU and then podiatry school at the California School of Podiatric Medicine, and then did my surgical residency at East Jefferson in New Orleans. I worked in Riverside a couple years before coming out to the Coachella Valley area. Part of the reason I love practicing it out here is I love talking about golf with my patients. I love talking about mountain biking and all the activities that everyone's doing. And we can keep a lot of patients out of surgery or improve their symptoms by simple shoe changes. And I'm not looking to endorse any specific brand. I have no affiliation with any shoe store. But I've just noticed certain patterns that patients tend to do better with for different activities or for different foot types. So to get started, we'll survey a little bit of the history of shoes. Well, excuse me, we'll go to the purpose of feet. The foot, when you first step with your heel onto the ground, its job is to absorb the shock. And if your foot's too rigid, you're more likely to have arthritis, you're more likely to have foot problems, you're more likely to have plantar fasciitis, you're more likely to have pain. In clinic, we would call that a cavus foot, conventionally, or a high arch foot. The subtalar joint is the pivoting joint underneath the ankle that allows you to move your foot inside and out when you're cutting or walking on a slope. When that joint locks or supinates, the foot goes from a soft shock absorber to a rigid, basically a rigid plank, and it locks the joints of the midfoot, allowing you to push off much more strongly. And if your arch is too high, you won't absorb the shock. If your arch is too low, you'll have trouble activating the locking mechanism. Additionally, the foot senses the ground, and that provides feedback to your entire body as to your posture, body positioning. It can also warn you of danger. If there's something on the ground like a snake or a sharp object. And temperature. Every year, I have 1 to 5 patients in the summertime who have diabetes or other problems and have numb feet. And they come in with a large burn where they've burned off the skin on the entire bottom of their foot from going out to get the mail. So something to be aware of out here in the desert where our temperature gets so hot in the summertime. The purpose of the shoe is to extend the ability of the foot. So number one, it offers further protection so we can walk out and get the mail when it's 120 degrees outside. It can increase the performance of the foot Too often, the main factor is fashion that I see, and there's nothing wrong with that, only when that's getting in the way of the comfort and the general health. Downsides, shoes do decrease our sensation. So our body isn't as aware of where our foot is. And the wrong shoe can lead to falling or chronic injury. Our foot does not adapt as fast when we're performing with certain shoes. And it could potentially even decrease our speed. Now, one thing I get asked about frequently is, why do we wear shoes? Why not go barefoot? And when I was first going to podiatry, barefoot was getting popular again. And it cycles about every 10 to 20 years. It gets very popular. The fad repeats because the new generation comes along who hasn't been through it yet. And, you know, there's a place for it. I don't totally knock it. Originally, it was Born to Run, a gentleman who studied a tribe that liked to run barefoot. And then the minimalist shoes, such as the five toes and different variations. And it can be a good thing. It's not terrible. John Daly golfs very well barefoot. But you run the risk. Most people try to convert too quickly, and they end up fracturing their metatarsal bones. Or they step on a piece of glass, and then they're in my clinic, and I have to pull that out and put them on antibiotics and drain whatever's growing in there. And if you really go through the history of humans and athletes, most long-distance athletes are heel strikers. And the foot isn't so much of an L as a T. And when you're running on your heel, you still have quite a bit of shock absorption from just slowing down the foot as it lands. An extension of the barefoot has been a newer type of shoe, and about the last 10, 15 years, the zero drop, Ultras or Hokas. And I actually met the creators of Ultras when they were first coming out, and they're a cool shoe. And there's advantages. If you're running on your forefoot using a zero drop, or basically a flat shoe with no lift in the heel, it's going to be softer on your knees. And sprinting, you're going to be faster running on the balls of your feet. So if you watch the Olympics, almost every jumper and sprinter is running on the balls of their foot. But again, converting too fast, or just some people are unable to adapt, you're going to run into metatarsal fractures and severely accelerate midfoot and ankle arthritis. Additionally, I've noticed patients that use these shoes have a higher propensity for plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, and then one other advantage is possibly less shin splints when using this type of shoe. Okay, so we were talking about surveying the history of runners and different groups of people. The oldest shoes that we have found were the sagebrush bark sandals found in Oregon from 8000 BC. The oldest leather shoes were found in Armenia from 3500 BC. However, shoes made in antiquity were degradable, and there have been earliest shoe footprints from 150,000 years ago. Multiple different findings throughout Africa. Surveying different societies and different shoes in antiquity, the Roman caligae, this was the marching shoe of the soldiers, and it offered mobility. It also had hobnails on the bottom, which were basically cleats or spikes, which were excellent in dirt, but rather dangerous on the Roman hard streets. However, when they were marching on the streets, they would march in unison, and it made an intimidating sound to armies when they would hear the hobnails clanking as the Roman soldiers marched. Medieval shoes, the left is a pair from Byzantine Egypt, and then the tripe on the right, which is a precursor to a clog. I have occasionally been accused of medieval torture when performing toenail procedures in clinic. However, many of the current fashionable shoes resemble medieval shoes. So I thought that was food for thought. The clogs, they weren't originally made by nurses. They were actually made in Dutch culture in the 1300s, and they were made to help in wet conditions. Farmers, laborers, an interesting study from clogs in the 1800s found that there was a drastic increase of osteochondritis dissecans. That is a form of arthritis where you get chips in the joint. They look like golf divots, and it often leads to the need to replace or fuse a joint. So while they were excellent for one characteristic, they didn't allow enough adaptation of the foot and proved to be detrimental in other areas. The Industrial Revolution allowed mass production, standard sizing, so that was great. However, it led to one of the biggest problems we have today, which is loss of what's called bespoke customization. So now when we get shoes, they're made to a standard size. It costs so much money for the shoe companies to make a mold for each size of shoe, but it's much harder and drastically more expensive to get customized shoes now, which leads to many of the issues that we have in our day-to-day life. Cowboy boots originated in Spain and then were mass-produced in the US in the 1800s. I want you to look at these boots from the Boston Rubber Shoe Company. So this company was originally made in 1853, increased production over the early 1900s, late 1800s, and it was founded by the Converse brothers. Their cousin pivoted and made the Converse Rubber Shoe Company in 1908. This shoe is iconic to America. Chuck Taylor, an early professional basketball player, marketed this shoe, and they dominated athletics from the 1930s through the 60s. They were actually the national shoe of the Army during World War II. They were the shoe of the Olympics from the 30s through the 60s. All right, so now getting to a bit of the meat of the presentation is helping you pick better shoes when you're looking. And predominantly, I'm recommending walking or running shoes. They're the same thing, they're just marketed different. But different things you can look out for based on your foot type. So the first is the heel counter. This is the back of the shoe. Some shoes like clogs don't even have one. Some heel counters are too sharp, which can lead to what's called a pump bump, which was much more common 30 years ago. If you're experiencing Achilles pain or a large bump on the back of your heel, usually we recommend going with shoes without heel counters or one that's much softer because it can cause many issues. The next is the heel cup. This is the area right underneath where your heel interfaces with the sole of the shoe. And some are too hard. Some I see are actually too soft. I see many people who have recently switched. That's a Brooks version of a Maximus shoe. And they acquire plantar fasciitis because the heel sinks into the shoe. Not everybody, it's just something I see quite frequently. When you're looking at shoes, you want to examine the flex point. So just like this gentleman bending the shoe on the bottom left, you can do that at the shoe store. And you want your flex point to be right at the ball of the foot. If the whole sole flexes, it usually leads to issues. Now, if they're comfortable, go ahead and wear them. But most people do better if it flexes right at the ball of the foot for walking and running, and then has some degree of support or rigidity in the midfoot and heel. Cushion, that's what's marketed to us as the most important part of shoes. And I think of cushion as the up and down comfort of the shoe when you're standing on it, versus the overall flex point as a different measurement of stiffness. And the maximalist shoes are the best on the market. So Hoka's, Ultras, they're the two brands that came up with it, and then everyone else is copying them right now. Those have the best cushion, which are great for many things, but also a traditional cushioning running shoe with a slightly higher arch, that does better for most people, such as the Brooks Glycerin on the left. A frequent issue that I encounter in clinic is pain on the side of the foot. It's usually the ball of the foot by the little toe, by the pinky toe, or the base of the fifth metatarsal on the side of the foot. And often it's because the shoe manufacturers put a ledge where the sole of the shoe goes up higher than the level of the insole where your foot's resting. And if your foot's wide, it can create a pressure point. So one of the things that I find is useful is to remove the insole and just see if that sole creeps up around the edge. A lot of times if you avoid that, you avoid pain on either the inside, maybe if you have a bunion, or the outside if you have a baby bunion or a prominent fifth metatarsal. It can be humbling to admit you need a wider shoe. Our society prizes long and slender feet, and if you look at many Nike basketball shoes, they're made just for that. The best way to test it is still the Brannock device. One thing I noticed is this patient isn't putting pressure on their foot. I can just tell by how wide the proportions are. So when you use this in the store, you want to stand because your bones will spread out. Very few people wear their shoes just when they're sitting. We're walking, we're running. And this can guide you. Now, if you do need a wider shoe, you often need a smaller size. Sometimes you can get away with a longer shoe to get the width, or you go with a shorter shoe with a wider width. Next, the toe box and instep height. So if you look at the x-ray on the right, you'll see some midfoot arthritis causing some bone spurring. This can be a very tender area if the instep, or the top of the shoe where the laces are interfacing, is too tight. So number one, you try to find a shoe that has enough room, or you can skip your laces at certain points to try to relieve that. Next would be the height of the toe box itself down at the end of the shoe. If you look at that foot picture on the bottom, you'll see a corn on the top of a hammer toe. And many patients can avoid getting the corns or needing surgery for hammer toes if they're able to adjust to shoes with a little taller or more flexible toe box. Corns and calluses and thick skin, we get those when we put more pressure on our skin. So weightlifters will get them when they're lifting the bar, and our feet will get them when there's too much pressure on one point. So if you can remove the pressure, if you can buy a shoe to fit the foot rather than trying to make the foot fit a shoe, you'll have a lot better results. A note about orthotics. In my experience, custom orthotics or even over-the-counter orthotics, they're a 50-50 success. Half the patients love them, use them for life. Half the patients never get used to them and say that hurt me like crazy. So I make them, I prescribe them, I recommend them. But with the grain of salt that maybe they do work for you, maybe they don't. We do scan the foot. We get to take a 3D picture of the shape of the foot and then send it to the factory. And then they send back the product. And it might take an adjustment. And we might do 5 adjustments and never get them to work. The original science was done on a paper by Drs. Root and Dr. Weed. back in the 50s, and they studied it on cadavers, and it was great. If you think about that early slide where we talked about the subtalar or the lower ankle joint pivoting back and forth, their general premise was to get that joint into neutral, which I think is a great idea. However, their study was done on cadavers, and that is the basis of orthotics. And those patients didn't give great feedback as to how they actually felt. But there is a place for many pathologies, especially flat foot in children, arthritis in feet, offloading prominent points on the plantar aspect of the bottom of the foot. It's harder to get orthotics to work for a high arch because an orthotic by nature stiffens the foot, and a high arch is already a stiff foot. And then my last point is just be careful. You'll find some shoe stores that'll try to charge you $2,000 for prefabricated orthotics. And I would just give you a caution about that. It's probably not worth your money. Okay, so my overview of running shoes, which are the primary shoe to help your feet calm down when they're having issues. A neutral cushion is what I recommend for feet with high arches or feet that don't like stiff shoes. The reason I like these shoes is they have excellent cushion, but they also have a slight heel lift, which for most patients in our society is what they need. It relieves the heel, relieves the Achilles. It also helps with pain in the ball of the foot. These have moderate longitudinal rigidity when you bend the shoe, as we talked about, but they won't lock the foot. They'll still allow you to be mobile. This is type of shoe is what I wear when I run. Brooks makes the Glycerin and the Ghost. Asics makes the Nimbus. They all have cloud names, Cumulus. There's plenty of different cushion shoes from different quality brands. And I think of shoes like cars. You know, someone says, oh, hey, you should go buy a Ford. And I come back and I have a Mustang. They say, no, you need an F-250. We're trying to haul a trailer. Well, it's the same with shoes. The major running shoe companies make different models based on the foot type. They all make a neutral cushion, and they all make the next couple of types we're going to talk about. This is a support shoe, a moderate support, maybe a mild flat foot, or if you just feel like your foot needs more support. If you're on a harder surface, sometimes the shoe does a little better. Talking about Asics, theirs is the Kayano, Brooks does the GTS. There's quite a few different brands, and if you go to a high quality running shoe store, they'll have it all laid out for you, tell you which one. And then finally, a motion control. And I have a higher arch, but I wear a motion control shoe when I'm working, but it's too stiff for me when I want to go exercise, when I want to run. But I find many patients with flat feet can get into a motion control shoe and they don't need orthotics and their pain goes away. That's a Gravity Defier. They had a store in town but pulled out, but you can still get them online. But every major brand makes a shoe in this category. Caution, don't ever wear a shoe like this when you're hiking if you can avoid it. They're so stable that your ankle will barely roll. But if you step on a root or a rock and tip it all the way, you won't be able to stop the foot from going all the way down, and that can lead to an ankle fracture or a severe sprain on unstable surfaces. And then finally, the Maximalist. I think these shoes are really cool. I recommend them for certain things, but not for everything. They are the current craze, and that's not terrible, but they're just not for everything. So I primarily recommend these for pain in the ball of the foot, things like arthritis of the great toe or neuromas. They're better for knee pain because they tend to put you more in the ball of your foot, and it puts you more of that barefoot walking position. Now, I also see a lot of patients who get heel pain after converting to this type of shoe. It can happen, or they get arch pain because they're so soft and the cushioning is so good, the patients sink into the shoe. But they definitely have their place, in my opinion. And then most shoe companies are of a herd mentality. So they'll go a certain direction. So they'll make all the shoes more supportive for 10 or 20 years, and then they'll make them all more cushiony. And right now, most of the shoe companies are duplicating the maximalist shoes and the high cushion shoes because they feel the best when you try them on for 5 minutes. But that doesn't always translate to walking for 2 hours. Most shoes that are shiny and are under $80, you're probably going to get what you pay for, unfortunately. If it works, that's great. It's a very individual purchase and subjective purchase. Just to talk about a few sports, golf shoes are basically a walking shoe, the slightly stiffer sole and cleats or spikes. And I was just talking to a patient before I came, and they had given up their golf shoes so they could walk the course. Very few of us need spikes. I'd say 80% of the golfers probably aren't at that level where it's that important. The goal is to keep you golfing, and if you can walk to your ball without pain, well, a running shoe might be okay. A caution, you don't want to be bouncing between different heights of shoes with your golf clubs because that's really going to throw off your swing. We had just had the BNP. Tennis shoes also have a stiff sole. A couple of days ago, I had a patient in who said, I love these tennis shoes when I'm playing tennis or pickleball, but my feet are hurting the more I wear them. It's better to wear a court shoe when you're playing. And I would recommend against wearing running shoes or walking shoes when you're playing racket sports. But maybe look at some of the brands that have more of a hybrid shoe, like New Balance, as they're stiff, but not as stiff as the professional level. It's better to play in a comfortable shoe than to not play in a professional level shoe. And then hiking, we talked about avoiding the motion control. I would add that caution to avoid maximalist shoes, because if you step on a thorn, I've done it in very supportive shoes, or step on a branch, it's very easy to roll the ankles. One thing I say about 30 times a day is that humans are not adapted to walk barefoot on tile floors for long periods of time. And people move out to the desert, they've come from a place with carpet where they're used to being inside, walking barefoot, and then they get severe pain on their heel or on the ball of their foot. And it only goes away when you get some house sandals or house slippers. It's common sense, but it avoids a lot of issues. And another issue is, as we go through life, we get fat in places where we don't, but unfortunately we lose it on the bottom of our feet, which leads to fat pad atrophy. And over the years, different companies and doctors have suggested injections, but they don't work. The only thing that really works is cushion. So if you're standing in the house cooking or doing chores, I recommend wearing some type of slipper or house sandal, even a croc. It'll save you a lot of trouble down the road. So my take-home message is match the shoes either with your foot type or with whatever issues you're having at that time. All of us go through different phases of activity, different phases of health, and sometimes we need to move from one type of a shoe to another. And $100, $130 is cheaper than most any doctor visit if you can find the right shoe. Try on lots of shoes, and you can go on Amazon and get some shoe covers like we wear in the operating room and wear those around the house and see if they feel good at home after an hour, and if not, then you can return them. I'm not trying to tell you to game the system, but in my opinion, 5 minutes wearing a shoe doesn't give you a fair analysis of what you're getting into. Be willing to invest time and money into your shoe selection. Last year, my mother came to visit, and she'd been having plantar fasciitis, and I dragged her to the shoe store, and I was talking to her, and the people there were nice, but I said, not those ones. And they wanted to argue a little bit, and I didn't get into it. I said, no, we'll hold off on those ones. And finally, we found the ones she liked, and she called me a week later, and her feet weren't hurting anymore. So, but it is an investment in money and time, and it can be frustrating having to go through it, but it's generally worth it. Wear what works. There's no one rule, in my opinion, for shoes and orthotics. So I have the picture of Larry Bird golfing in his work boots. Get rid of shoes that cause you pain. For some reason, us humans get emotionally attached to our shoes. Yeah, they either remind us of a time or they just look cool. But get rid of them so you're not tempted to put them on. I had a pair of shoes that every time I wore them, about after an hour or two, my heels would start killing me, and then they'd hurt for a couple of days, and I'd have to stretch them out. And then I got rid of them, and that didn't happen anymore. So it can be that simple. And then finally, function over form for activities. If you're going out on the town, wear a beautiful shoe, feel good. But note that you can cause a lot of damage by wearing the wrong shoe day in and day out. All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Rife. So what we'll do is we'll take some questions in the audience, and we'll go back and forth. We have a couple questions online, too, for our Zoom audience. And Dr. Rife, as you get a question in the room, if you could repeat it before your answer, that would be helpful. We have one in the gentleman in the back here.
What do you mean by shoe cover?
If you go on Amazon or eBay and just search for shoe covers, you can write surgical shoe covers. Spend 10, 15 bucks. They'll give you a bunch of disposable shoe covers. That way you don't scuff them up. Most shoe companies, they don't care if you wear your shoes on carpet to try them out. And you can kind of feel a little better about wearing them around the house. And then if you need to return it, it's not so much of an issue. And they have a lot of, that's great. And like I said, I'm not endorsing any store, but they do carry a lot of the neutral cushioning and maximalist shoes and better hiking shoes in our area. I think it's good.
If we could repeat, I'm sorry, Doc, if you could repeat the question for him.
So the question was wearing dress shoes that are made of leather where your foot makes an imprint over time. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think overall it's a good thing. And I think of the Brooks bicycle saddle where you wear the leather into your shape. And our newer athletic shoes don't need the break-in like the traditional leather shoes. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if it hurts, get rid of it. Sure.
Thoughts?
Yeah. So for an arch that's that high and rolling that much. Okay. So the question is, he has a high arch. He wears orthotics. He plays a lot of tennis and rolls your. And you have a wider foot that's hard to get a size for, and you roll your ankles a lot. So options and recommendations, a shoe probably that's a little lower would be better. So it's not as high off the ground. Physical therapy to strengthen the peroneal tendons, which are on the outside of the ankle and foot. They resist the rolling motion. And if you can go through a program, oftentimes it'll improve your subconscious reflexes that prevent rolling of the ankle. It's a give and take with the orthotics because they can make you roll it more, but they can help with the pain. And sometimes if the other things don't work, we'll get a high top. So then you're less likely to roll it, or even a lace-up brace. And if none of that works, there's surgical options where we can lower your arch, strengthen the tendons, and strengthen the ligaments. I wouldn't try to talk you into it. I'd try to do everything else first. Mm-hmm.
All right, let me take a Zoom one here. It's kind of a double, couple parts to it. I had surgery on my right ankle a couple years ago to report 2 torn tendons on the outside of my ankle. Since then, my right foot is supinated and much weaker than my left foot. That's part A of it. Then per an MRI, I also have some arthritis and tendinitis. What type of shoe might this person be looking for? There's a lot of pieces there.
Sure. So shoes, again, similar issue as our last question mechanically. So the foot's supinating, meaning it's rolling out in the direction that most of us would sprain our ankles. It's the opposite of pronation, opposite of a flat foot. So with that severe of an issue, even after having a surgery, they probably need some type of ankle brace, maybe even a custom ankle brace, which we didn't get into, but they are covered by most insurances. They do allow flexion at the ankle joint, but they limit the available eversion, inversion, or supination. Again, high tops for general activity, maybe even a hiking shoe. That's what I would start with in that ankle. And then with the arthritis and the other issues, unfortunately, you might be looking at further surgery down the road.
Another piece to that is there anything besides socks to prevent blisters on feet?
That's a good one. The first thing would be different types of socks and high quality socks. Most of our socks, even the ones that tout cotton or wool, most of them are mostly plastic, and they're full of polyester or other synthetics when you really read through the makeup. So I try to go on Amazon and look for 100% cotton, 100% wool. Even polypropylene is much better than polyester. So I would start there because that'll give you more moisture control. And then you're looking at powders, even antiperspirants to help keep the moisture down to prevent the blisters. There are prescription strength. I've never had a patient prefer prescription strength foot antiperspirant over an over-the-counter spray antiperspirant for the feet. And then make sure the shoes fit. If they're too loose, the feet will move around with the activities and you're more likely to get the blisters.
Great. A follow-up to that on the same person is there any value in so-called bunion socks that separate a big toe and say the next one?
If it feels good, yeah, it's definitely valuable. Definitely worth the price. Bunions, I have never heard of or seen a patient resolve their bunion with splints, taping, padding, cushions, but you can make it livable. So while you wear it, while you use it, it can improve your symptoms. And for many people, that's much better than having to recover for months from a bunion surgery.
Great. Let's take in the room. We have questions, front row.
Any downside to wearing socks?
Hygiene. I mean, that's the main issue. Yeah. I mean, if it feels fine, you do run a little higher risk of blisters and some issues, but there's many people that do great like that. So there's the general things that I just mentioned, but then if it works, it works. Yeah. So the question was, he gets calluses on the outside in the middle of his foot, and is there anything to alleviate those besides scraping it? So number one is you check the pressure points and see if there's a ledge on the shoe or if they're too tight, if there's some mechanical reason that we can address. Occasionally padding. So I like medical adhesive felt. They make pads, but often if you just buy a roll, again, of medical adhesive felt, you can cut out a shape and stick it in your shoe to take pressure off that area. Make sure it's not rolling around in the foot. Occasionally, we will see what's a patient calls a callus. It is actually a wart. So then we would do a little different treatment for that. And there are some medicines that can help those dissipate. When you send a callus or a wart to the pathology lab, it usually looks just the same underneath the microscope. So quite often we'll cross over different medications for those two issues. However, there is a caution that many over-the-counter callus and wart medicines will cause a wound. So use it for a day, check it. Use it for a day, check it. Because if you go too fast with it, you can go from dealing with the callus to dealing with the big wound. And then if you're not numb in your feet, you don't have diabetes, you don't have peripheral arterial disease, it's generally safe to use a pumice stone and scrape it yourself. It works best when it's soft after you shower. But unfortunately, corns and calluses are one of the hardest things to get rid of. And if none of those things work, occasionally we can smooth the bone down. And I've seen countless patients where I've repositioned the bone or removed a prominence where their corns and calluses disappear after that.
Great. Let me jump back real quick to Zoom one question, then we'll come back. Rolled my ankle, resulting in an ATFL injury, months of physical therapy. When I decided to return to pickleball, my ortho recommended high top shoes. Is there a specific definition for high top? They've found some that may or may not have worked to go over the ankle, but they're kind of asking what the definition of high top is.
Yeah, in my opinion, if it goes above the bony bumps on the sides of the ankles, because that's the level of the joint. And if your shoe crosses above that area, then it's giving more support to that area. If it's a little higher, but it's not going past the ankle joint itself, then it's not giving the support that the orthopedist is recommending.
Great. In the audience here, we had yes, go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So the situation is she has sciatica issues, has had issues with the hip, flat feet, history of tendonitis, which would be associated with the flat feet, and has been using motion control, the very supportive shoes I talked about, the Brooks Aerial, and orthotics, and if that's the right approach or if it's too much support. So my approach would be to first make sure your sciatica and back is totally worked up. And that's one of the nice things about working at Desert Orthopedic Center is we have conservative back doctors, we have spine surgeons, and we can talk and send people back and forth. So once that's resolved, if I saw you, I would check to see if your limbs are equal length. And an easy way to do that at home would be to sit very square on the ground against the wall and have someone else look at your heels and see if they're sticking out the same direction. Now, technically speaking, that's not as exact as doing a full lower extremity x-ray, but it's more functional and more effective to get what your body actually needs. Another thing you can look at is if you're standing still, have a friend see if one of your shoulders is higher or lower. And the higher shoulder often correlates to a lower limb because your body naturally compensates, or the tilt of your hips. The tilt of the hips will directly correlate to a higher or lower limb. And then if you do see that, it's usually a quarter to half an inch. You can put a little lift inside the heel. And if it's severe, you can have custom shoes made. So I would check that. And then moving down, continue the physical therapy that's been recommended for the sciatica. Moving down to the flat feet, it's a trial and error to see if the orthotics and the aerials are too much, because I could certainly see that being an issue. And so then you say, okay, if you like Brooks, go to a lighter Brooks shoe like the Ghost and see if that feels better. Or even a maximalist shoe with the orthotic in there might be okay because it would balance it out. But at that point, you're kind of in a trial and error situation, just to see what amount of support feels the best for you. And maybe the aerial without orthotics is great. Maybe you need a little lift on one side. Maybe you need more workup on the back just to make sure, because many of my patients improve as soon as their back's taken care of. All their foot problems go away and they're no longer my patient, which is fine, they're better. But that would be my approach to your situation. The question was, would a foot problem cause sciatica or sciatica cause the foot? In my opinion, it's usually the sciatica causes foot issues, specifically burning and tingling, but it's not out of the realm of possibility where a foot issue leads to imbalance. And I've seen many patients who get in different shoes or orthotics, or I do a surgery for their high arch or their low arch, and their knee or hip problems improve a fair amount. The question is, shoes that have worked well for him in the past were discontinued, and he's trying to find a resource to suggest newer models that would be more comparable to those ones that worked before. I don't know of a specific website that lists that information. I had a pair of shoes I loved, and I lost one of them. I don't know where. obviously. But I went to find it, and it had been discontinued. So I searched for that specific generation because I really liked that one. Couldn't find it. And then I happened to find a single shoe that was the exact one from an amputee that was selling it on eBay. So it was great. But unfortunately, I've gone through this numerous times myself. You're kind of back at the drawing board, and you have to go spend half a day at the shoe store again. And if it's really a big issue, some of the bigger shoe stores like Roadrunner Sports, they're a national retailer, but they have their base in San Diego. Sometimes you can get more accomplished going in there half a day just to get it done and really get a fair feeling of all the different shoes. But I agree, that's a tough situation, and it's part of the problem of the herd mentality of the different shoe companies. Because they make one, you love it. The next year it looks completely different with the same name, and it feels completely different.
And on that, I think somebody just posted, they find that some of the same shoe, they say the same model, the same number, the same everything, has either a wider toe box or a narrow toe box. It's changed based on the year. And so how do you determine, as just really trying on the ones that may work and may not?
Unfortunately, it's trial and error.
Yeah. And go, sir. I'm sorry, there you go, sir.
Sure. So the question was, he has neuropathy and numbness in his feet, has rolled his ankles, has gone through multiple quality shoe brands, and is feeling like he's getting weaker and is kind of not sure where to go now. Yeah. So patients with diabetic neuropathy, the insurance will pay for shoes where you go to a prosthetic store. And well, most of the insurance, you never know with insurances these days, but they'll cover high quality shoes that you're fit into by a prosthetist, the same people that make prosthetic legs and arms. And it has an extra layer of padding to try to prevent wounds and irritations. But you're in a tough situation because if you've lost one of the primary functions of the foot, which is sensation, and that affects your balance, it affects your posture. So there are certain ankle braces that are covered by insurance for that issue. In my opinion, they're okay for that issue. They're not great. You always want to try physical therapy first to strengthen it. Explore any of the causes of neuropathy, such as back issues, diabetes, alcoholism, HIV, chemotherapy. Make sure you check all those boxes and that there's no stone left unturned, because maybe one of those issues you can treat and it improves. That's much better than getting in a brace, because the more you're in a brace, then the weaker your foot gets when you're out of the brace. But it's a tough situation we deal with every day. And so usually the answer is try to treat the neuropathy. If the insurance will cover some better shoes, do it. And then try physical therapy to strengthen it and see what you can get back. The Altera?
The Altera?
I don't know what shoes you're talking about, sorry.
Altera?
Oh, the Ultra?
Ultra.
Oh, okay. Or like the GT, like the Asics GTs, or? And then what was the other one?
G-Defy.
Oh, the gravity defiers. So the question was, what shoe would you recommend between an Ultra, which is a high cushion, flat arch, flat foot shoe, versus a gravity defier, which is a high cushion shoe with more of a heel lift in it? Which one of those would you recommend for neuropathy? And I don't have an exact answer for that one. That's a tough one. You theoretically might be a little less likely to roll your ankle in an Ultra, but both of those you're sitting pretty high up for numb feet. So you might want to go with something with a little lower sole. Well, the Ultras don't have any lift in their heel, so the level of the heel and the toe is exactly on the same level. So for certain issues, that's better. And you're maybe a little less likely to roll your ankle if you have neuropathy than the gravity defier, which is much higher up. But they're both relatively high. The soles are very thick on both of those. So you might be better with a lower height or less thick sole overall and not even go with either of those for neuropathy.
So what should you recommend?
I don't have an exact one for that, unfortunately. I would do, again, trial and error. But similar answer as previously, try to work out the neuropathy. If the insurance will cover you, go to the prosthetic place. And then if not, I would probably try more of a neutral cushion, but it's not an exact recommendation for you. So neutral cushion being like the Brooks Glycerin, Mizuno Wave Rider, Asics, Nimbus or Cumulus, shoes like that. Yeah. So the question was, which shoe would I recommend for her? She has a propensity for ingrown toenails and maybe some hammer toes. So ingrown toenails are typically caused by too much pressure, the nail digging into the skin. And most patients have a toenail that's kind of hooked or shaped like a hoop or even a rainbow kind of going around, and it keeps pinching in over time. And then once it gets irritated enough, the skin starts swelling and you get the ingrown toenail, you get the pain or maybe even an infection. So certainly shoes that don't push too hard can decrease the likelihood of getting an ingrown toenail. So more width, more room in the toe box. But you also have to be careful if it's too big, you'll slide around and the toe will bang on the end of the shoe, and that could cause it as well. And then for hammer toes, just enough room so they're not pinching on the top of the shoe or on the end of the shoe. And there's other treatments for both of those. We can correct the ingrown toenail relatively easy in clinic. Hammer toes can be corrected in clinic for certain types, and others have to be done in the OR. But you never do the surgery unless you really need it.
All right, let's take another question in the front.
Now, the question was, do I see any problem between going between men's and women's shoes, and are they made any differently? So I don't know if they're made differently other than size, but I certainly don't see any problem in going between them. If it works, it works. Well, that's my advice.
All right, on the left over here. Yes, go ahead.
So the question was, her husband goes for walks and feels like pebbles in the ball of his foot, in the middle, the ball of the foot. Yeah. And is that a problem from the shoes? Is it a problem from the socks, or just his feet have a problem? So that sounds like a nerve issue. Most commonly would be a neuroma. We don't know unless we look at him in clinic. Typically, peripheral neuropathy starts in the tips of the toes. So you want to make sure the shoes aren't too tight, because that would lead to the metatarsals pinching on the nerves. There's neuroma pads you can try on Amazon. We can do injections in clinic, and we can do surgery to either decompress the nerve, which then you would retain some sensation, or remove, if it was confirmed to be that issue, remove that portion of the nerve. Now, commonly I see patients with that issue do a little better in a maximalist shoe, like the Hoka or the Ultra, or there are other brands that have versions of that now. So it's worth a try, but that would be my approach to that issue.
All right, we'll take last question here from online. It says, so I have potentially hallux rigidus in both large toes. Is there a shoe you might recommend that, or different ones that might help that?
The question was, the patient has hallux rigidus or arthritis of the large great toe joints on both feet. And what shoes would we recommend for that issue? So I usually recommend either a maximalist shoe, like the Hoka or the Ultra or the other variants, or a motion control shoe, because their soles have much less flex at the flex point, which is right where that particular patient has arthritis. Other things you could try would be to go on Amazon and get a carbon fiber insert. So they're very light and they go between the insole and the sole of the shoe, and that can limit the motion or the pressure and motion that's put on that particular joint.
Great, thank you. And I think that we're at time, and then the doctor will be here for a couple minutes, but we'll thank everybody online and Thank everybody here for being here in the audience. And just as a reminder, this will be, as this has been recorded, it will be edited, closed captioning included, and then we will have it on our Eisenhower Health website, our Desert Orthopedic website, and our YouTube channel with all of our lectures probably within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So with that, Dr. Rife, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.